In the videos that I've given before, hopefully you've watched some of them, but if this is one of the first ones you've watched, this one is about the rapture. Probably need to go back and take a look at a couple of the others to give you some better understanding of what the rapture is. But in this video, I'm going to give you the characteristics of the rapture. There are four. First of all, it will be sudden. Second, it will be unexpected. Third, it'll be surprising. And fourth, we should be alert. Jesus said, "No man knows the day or the hour." So we should live as to be ready for the Son of Man coming in an hour. Because you're not going to expect him. Matthew 14:44. Remember, it says no man will know. Well, I don't know about you, but my name is not no man. Your name is probably not no man. So that means Jesus was talking to us. Only a pre-tribulation rapture, and you'll need to go back to some of the rapture videos to understand that one a little bit, presents a story about Jesus' return that talks about or is the rapture. Throughout the ages, Christians have understood the rapture to be imminent. Nothing could be better motivation to holy living than knowing Jesus could come at any moment. In fact, it could come before I finish this video. Likely not, but we never know. Also, Jesus will come in a cloud and take his believers back to heaven, where he will prepare a place for them. There will be an exodus of believers that will leave non-believers on earth alone. Jesus will not meet his non-believers in a battle at this point. He will not establish a reign on the earth. Remember, the second coming of Jesus is one event that we probably can consider comes in two different parts. What we think of as the second coming of Jesus, of course, is a glorious part of Revelations 19, verses 11 through 18. But these verses in Thessalonians and Corinthians and Matthew and John and others talk about a different version of when Jesus will return to earth. They talk about him coming, taking back the people, and preparing a place. When Revelations 19:11, it talks about Jesus coming to earth and staying, and we as believers will follow him, not be caught up and taken to heaven. Clearly, there's two different points of Jesus coming. So the scriptures that provide these characteristics I've already gone through in another video. And this is just a summary of what to expect when all this happens, the rapture. The 7,000-year theory is one of the oldest theories dating back from the earliest days of the church. It begins with God creating heavens and earth in 6 days and resting on the seventh. It should be noted that God does not spell out upon which day was the first day in terms of days of the week. The theory states that God will deal with mankind in 6 days of his 6 days. Could be 6,000 years of our days, and then rest on the seventh day. Nowhere in the Bible does it say Saturday. That's not to detract from those who believe that the Sabbath is on a Saturday. It's just to say, God doesn't say it. Another mystery. Well, knowing Scriptures verses will help us to understand, first of all, 2 Peter teaches one day with the Lord is 1,000 years. In Hebrews 4:11 presents the millennium as a day of rest. Revelations 21:9 gives us the idea of a 1,000-year millennium. So we see that God's timing is different. Reminded, the guy went up to God and he asked him a couple of questions. He said, God, is it true that 1,000,000 years to us is the same as a second to you? God said, yeah, that's right. Well, then the guy asked God, he says, well, is $1,000,000 to us the same as a penny to you? God said, yeah, that's right. So this man says, well, would you give me a penny? God said, yeah, in a second. Think that one through. Well, according to the Jewish calendar, which has today's year, 360 days, not 365, 3,760 years after the creation, the Christian era began. 3,760 years. That is almost 4 of God's days, according to what we just kind of got through. Since its beginning, the Christian era has lasted almost 2,000 years, or 2 more of God's days, maybe. This means mankind is approaching the 7th God day, the millennium. But before the millennium occurs, 2 things must take place: the rapture and the tribulation. As we now know in the 21st century and a new millennium, there is a sense of change in the air with mounting anticipation about the rapture and the second coming of Jesus. Today, messianic expectations are rampant among Jews in Israel. Now, some Jews, historic Jews, are not true believers or followers, but many still are. Predictions of the rapture and the second coming are widespread among Christians. Doomsday prophecy are flourishing among cults. As a reminder, in Matthew 24:44, Jesus said, "No man knows the day." So we must be ready. Critics of the pre-tribulation rapture, just kind of give you some background about the mystery of the rapture, often refers to the lack of historical support. These critics have argued that it was invented by John Darby in the mid-1800s and was never mentioned before it. Well, these arguments generally reason that because this teaching is less than 100 years old, it cannot be biblical. Or Christians would have held to this view many years earlier. What this reasoning fails to completely understand is the Bible truth must be determined by the clear teaching of the Scripture. Not knowing that teaching has been perceived throughout all of history. However, a substantial amount of Scripture evidence reveals a belief in the pre-tribulation rapture long before John Darby was there. The earliest documents of the ancient church, including the New Testament, reveal a clear pre-millennium rapture. Pre-tribulation points to the early church clear in the eminence as evidence that pre-tribulation was held by at least a few from the very earliest of times, maybe quite a few. Clearly, early views of the church theology were underdeveloped and sometimes contradictory based on things that were developed, talked about, diverse among the various theological viewpoints. Finding clear tribulation spelled out in the early church fathers is difficult, but some pre-tribulation elements are very clear. When systematically with their other prophetic views, these elements contradict post-tribulationism and support pre-tribulationism. And again, I've described those in detail in another video. For an example, the Apostle Fathers clearly taught pre-tribulation features of the imminence. So an examination of the early Fathers reveals that they were predominantly pre-millennialists. I found at least 8 listed writings from the year 100 AD to 330 AD that supported these views. While the early church fathers expected the church to be suffering and persecuted when the Lord returns, there are also belief in the imminent return of Christ, which is the central feature of the pre-tribulation thought. In other words, the church is not going to suffer when Jesus returns, because when he returns in the rapture, he takes back all believers to heaven. And in Revelations 3:10, it says, all believers I will save from the hour of trial, or the tribulation. And a lot of things have come along and talked about the imminence of the apostolic fathers and the difference in what they thought and believed. And that's for another time and a little more deep and whatever. But one of the things that I think is kind of important, the shepherds of Hermanus speak of escaping the tribulation, even as far back as that. So in the end, one cannot find a clear statement in the early church regarding the rapture. However, the argument, the pre-tribulation is not valid only because of the lack of historical support in the early church, is certainly not true. What we can conclude from the early church is, 1, they expected a literal coming of Christ, followed by a literal 1,000 years kingdom. They believed in the imminent coming of Christ, with occasional pre-tribulation inferences. And finally, they were being persecuted by Roman governments, but they could not equate this with the future tribulation wrath. So this was clearly different from any wrath that would come in the tribulation. So the characteristics of the rapture, as what this video tried to point out, says that it could happen without any warning. Tribulation comes with a lot of warning. The millennium comes with a lot of warning. And in fact, because the second coming, as we know it, when Christ returns to earth and stays here, is between the tribulation and the millennium, it comes with a lot of warning. The rapture does not. It can happen at any time. So, the rapture says we need to be believers. So when Jesus comes in a cloud, comes to pick all the believers up and take them back to heaven, we will be in that group. You should subscribe and ask others to watch this video. It's not an easy one to watch sometimes, but with background on the rapture on the other videos, it will help you understand this one more. Thanks for watching.